Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Nā mai hoki mai, everyone. Today I have the opportunity of talking to a very smart young woman, Toni Grace, who I think has been involved in international relationships around the world. She is at the end of doing her master's degree on sustainable development goals that have been put together by the United Nations. I know a little bit about the SDGs, as they're called, and this is a great opportunity for me to upskill and learn more about it. I'm intrigued as to what's going to come out of this conversation. It's one I've been wanting to get done for some time, and Toni wanted to make sure she was near the end of her masters before we did it. So today, that's who I'm sitting down with. Listen up and enjoy, and it's going to be fascinating to see what comes from this conversation. Welcome back, everybody. I am sitting down today talking to Toni Grace. Good afternoon, Toni.
Kia ora, Harv. Thanks for having me.
And we're starting now because we'd started the conversation and realised we actually need to press go here and get something recorded because we'd started the conversation. It's very easy to do with Toni. Today, we're going to be talking about, for the first time ever, the Sustainability Development Goals developed by the United Nations. And Toni is, I'm not going to say you're an expert, I'm going to say you're a learner in this space. I consider you an expert, but I'm rapt to have you here, Toni, because most people don't actually know what the hell they are and where they've come from.
This is true.
So it's a huge pleasure having you on today, Toni. Thank you. Who are you?
Kia ora. Yeah, I'm Toni Grace, as you said. I'm a mother of two. I live in Palmy, moved here about 6 years ago almost now, and moved to, my husband's opened a brewery with our business partner, so I kind of moved for a brew, but for the longest part of my career, I've actually worked in international relations. So a bit of a varied background. Originally started work at the British High Commission, had a master in political science and international relations, so kind of then naturally progressed into work in the international relations space for central government, and then made the move to Palmy and actually did international relations for local government. So a bit of an interesting mix there, but in recent years, through that journey in international relations, I learned a lot about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and therein kind of kicked in a bit of a sustainable professional career transition for me.
How do you get into international relationships? What makes you go, shit, yeah, I want to do that?
Well, for me, it probably stems back to when I was a teenager. I went on an AFS exchange. Don't know if you've heard of that global student exchange program. I went to Denmark for a year, and doing something like that quite young in life really opens up your eyes. I grew up in the heart of New Zealand, and everybody's lives kind of revolved around the mall and kind of small town issues, and then to go overseas and see people living a different way of life, challenging a lot of your assumptions about things. And in particular, I became fascinated by the issue of immigration, which is where I've actually worked for a lot of my professional life. And particularly how the policies were playing out so differently in a country and a culture which otherwise was so similar to my own. So from there, I came back and went into study in political science and international relations. Fascinated, loved living in Scandinavia, but just interested in this idea that, countries can be so similar and also so different, and what is it that influences those pathways and changes in relationships.
And so when I met you initially, I think you were working for Palmerston North City Council?
That's right, yeah.
And you were, so it was local government but international relations?
That's right, yeah. So went from study to, working for the British High Commission for a while, and then to MB, working for immigration in the international relations space. So as you'd imagine, trying to run something like an immigration system, you need a lot of really good relationships with other countries in the way that you kind of connect up your systems and share information. So that was my job for the longest time, and it was all about how do you connect and foster these intergovernmental relations at a national level. So I started there, and then almost a little ironically, it wasn't until we moved to Palmy, just when I was thinking, where the hell am I going to find a job in international relations in Palmerston North, the local council advertised for a brand new international relations manager because there was a real kind of growth phase for the city, in a sense that in the big industries, ag, food, international education, trade, there was so many links that were vital to have really strong international relationships and partnerships. So there it was, serendipitous, just when I was scratching my head about what to do, this job turned up, and did that for about 5 years. And that's where I met you, Huff. I think we were both part of a kind of a judging panel for Innovate one year. And then I bumped into you at the SDG conference in Auckland the following year, and we had a chat there.
So, Toni, the thing that I didn't get when we first met was it took me a while to work you out, right? It was like you were an enigma because you were in Palmy, you were a mother of 2 children. I couldn't work out how you balance this international stuff and having a young family. How do you do it?
It was tricky. I mean, thankfully I don't have to travel much anymore. The pandemic kind of put all that to the side, and also have since kind of transitioned my career. Yeah, it's hard work, but between myself and my husband, we balance things, and it's hard going. It really was hard going, particularly when the kids were younger. And I owe a lot to him and to my family for the support that I got to be able to go do these things. But I think at the start of my career, I think the traditional way you look at a career in international relations is, you get an MFAT, you get a posting, you become a diplomat, and you're kind of based in these big, long 3-year postings somewhere else. But because I had a young family by that point already, my preference was really for a job where I could work internationally and foster these international relations, but still very much be based in New Zealand. So that's the kind of career I've had, where it's been a couple of trips a year. But it was also kind of getting to me, Harv, and this brings us to the sustainable development stuff. I think one of the catalysts was learning about the sustainable development goals in the course of that work. But even then I did one of those carbon footprint things, where it tells you, your emissions and your footprint and what your overshoot day is and how many planets you'd need to sustain, if everyone lived the way you did. And mine was appalling. It was like 7.8 planets or something like that. So, and a lot of that was down to all the international travel. Like I said, I've transitioned careers, not exclusively because of that, but it's been something that I reflect on, how much international travel has an impact.
And Toni, thank you so much for coming up and saying g'day in Auckland. And I remember thinking, who is this? And it was just like, I've met you once in Palmy.
Yeah.
And then when you meet somebody out of context, it was just like, I know this face, who is this young woman? And luckily I went, yes, I know. And then I'm going, hang on, but you're here at this thing. And yeah, it was, I've got to say, I'm really pleased that the brain switched on. I went, okay, yep, it's a woman from Palmerston North. Got it, Auckland, yeah. And then you are, catching up from time to time. We've been involved in other things, back with Innovate.
Yes.
Coming to drink your beer.
Yep.
In Palmerston North, which is fabulous.
Appreciate our customers. Thank you, Hal.
Yep. And then you're doing your masters?
Yes, I'm a bit of a sucker for that. When I first was talking to my husband about it, he's like, you want to do another one? Because I've got a master's in political science from, I think, 2010, 2012. And I think there's something about every 7 years, all the cells in your body have completely replaced themselves. So I'm kind of thinking maybe it took me 7 years to forget the trauma of how much hard work it was to try and work and do a master's the first time, that I kind of went, yeah, let's do another one. But a lot of that came down to my discovery about the Sustainable Development Goals through the course of my international relations work. And suddenly everything else I was doing in the work, the sustainable conversations about how to have a more sustainable world, how to address the most pressing issues of our time, everything else just kind of didn't matter so much anymore. And so I wasn't interested in going on international trips to talk about anything else. And I was weaving more and more of the Sustainable Development Goals into the work that I did, because I firmly believe, and still do, that if cities and if countries are wanting to talk the global language and relate with each other about development, about economic development, sustainable development, they need to be able to speak in the language of that. And that's the Sustainable Development Goals, the one and only common framework we have across all countries of the UN to be working together towards a common set of goals, frameworks and targets.
So for those people who do not know what they are, and there will be people listening to this podcast who do not know what they are, how do you explain it?
Yeah, and I don't judge anyone for that either, because I even came, despite the fact I had a career in international relations, I didn't really cotton on to the SDGs until several years after they were signed. So 2015 was when the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals were signed by all countries, all 193 countries of the United Nations. They are a set of integrated goals. So I think a lot of the time when we think about sustainability still, we think, eco, environment, specifically goals just about the environment. But one thing you'll notice when you look at the 17 is they are an integrated set of social, environmental and economic goals. I timed myself this morning, Harv. I can say all of them in one breath. Do you want me to go through them? All right,
here we go. Okay.
I'm going to have to live this up. Set up expectations now. Ready?
Just drum roll. I'm just preparing here. And just so people, before you start, so the 17 goals have been worked out. These are the 17 things that is every nation, 193 nations, are aiming for, have signed off on. John Key, I think, signed out.
That's right.
Right, signed off on and going, this is what we are committed to try and achieve. And so, Toni Grace, on the count of 84, on the count of 3, let's go. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. I wasn't going to make it there for a minute. You
were starting to shake it then.
I was. So it reminds me of a kid when you're trying to hold your breath going through a tunnel.
I was going to say it was like watching one of those action movies. That's impressive.
Got there. So that's all 17. And they sound really aspirational, and they are really aspirational. It's like zero hunger, no poverty. But behind these 17 goals are 169 different specific targets. So more than just being vague, make what you will of them. There are real targets behind a lot of these goals, and also at least 250 odd different indicators that all countries are being measured on every year to see how they're progressing and how they're ranking against these goals. Can you guess where New Zealanders have currently on the latest SDG progress report?
Out of 193, from number 1 being the top.
Mm-hmm. Guess who are at the top, by the way?
Who?
Guess which countries are
I don't know. I know who.
The bloody Scandinavians.
Are they?
They're good at everything.
They're good at
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to guess we're number 43.
No, actually, a year of little faith. We're a bit better than that, Harv.
Oh, are we?
Yeah.
Okay, how are we doing?
I think currently 26.
Okay.
Might have been 23. Anyway, it's in that ballpark, which sounds great, except we were 19th a couple of years ago.
And the reason I said 43 is that because of our ag sector being so big, that I thought that might knock us down on some big targets, right?
Yeah.
So that's why.
And it's quite interesting reading when you look at it. And in terms of goals that New Zealand's progressing well at in comparison to a lot of the rest of the countries, we're way up the top there in terms of clean and affordable energy, in large part because we have so much renewable energy use in New Zealand. Gender equality, doing pretty well. And of course, as any woman in New Zealand would say, we've still got plenty of way to go there
But
too.
I'm talking to you nicely.
Yeah, you are. And there are some, though, it's really interesting when you look at the progress report. There are some goals where we can't even say where we're at on the goal. We can't measure because the data's not there. We can't actually measure and report against the targets. A good one. But we're making progress there. So a good one was a couple of years back. We were unable to. There's a great thing where they show whether you're going up, whether you're going down, forwards, backwards, kind of static. And goal 12, one of my favourites, responsible consumption and production. They just had 3 dots on it because we didn't even have the data to be able to report on how well we were doing, against it. And in addition to that, which is, I guess, more of an external review, member countries are able to do what's called a voluntary national review every year, where they just kind of self-report on how they're doing towards these goals. And of course, like all things with the UN, they are voluntary, right? So that all countries of the world have signed up to these goals and targets and have committed to kind of doing their best to achieve them. But ultimately, it's not like somebody's going to be hauled up before a court if by 2030, which is the target date for these goals, they haven't made them. So there needs to be the will there to achieve them. There needs to be that kind of coherent commitment, ongoing commitment to the goals, so not just enough to sign up to them in 2015. Because already, as you can do with a bit of basic maths, we're already kind of halfway through, almost.
So, Toni, the cynics listening to this will be going, so whipped shit, the UN...
made some colourful postcards, yeah.
Yeah, who are they?
Yeah.
And what right do they have to tell us what to do?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
And the answer is the UN doesn't, but it's in the name, right? It's the United Nations. It's made up of nations, and our countries, as you said, our government, I think under John Key at the time, signed up to them. This is where our goalpost is. So in many ways, it was the collective global song sheet, which everyone has signed up to and agreed to kind of go home and start singing to. And that was the countries agreeing with each other, not some faceless bureaucrat in the back of a room just kind of coming up with it. And what was quite interesting about the SDGs is their previous iteration, you might have heard of them, were the Millennium Development Goals.
No. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so they were kind of decided at the start of the millennium. Similar thing, nice little square icons and images, and but there were only 8. And I guess in a very typical, Western-centric approach to their development, they were focused on the developing world, as in there are 8 goals. A lot of them were around, infant mortality, poverty, which kind of sent the message that, the rest of the world, us here in the developed world, we've got our shit sorted. But here's some goals for you guys because you need to kind of catch up to where we are. The SDGs, by contrast, obviously the difference is 17 of them. They're more holistic, so they're environmental, economic, social, but also they're at everyone. And it's recognising in a declaration from all countries of the world that everyone's got to do their part. And in many ways, a lot of the problems that the developing world is grappling with are caused by irresponsible patterns of consumption, production in the developed world. So it recognises the fact that we're all in this together, and countries like New Zealand, America, US, UK, wherever, they need to do their part as well. It's not just a matter of sitting up on a high horse and looking down at everyone else. So that's, I think, one of the great things, but also the development of the SDGs was the biggest global consultation exercise that's ever been undertaken. So these weren't kind of cobbled together by a bunch of experts in the back room of the UN. They were a multi-year process of development, but going out and talking to communities all over the world at all levels and getting people's input into how they should be developed and what they should be. So as they go, they're really solid. You read them and, at a high level, you can't really disagree with any of the goals, which is probably why they were able to be signed off. But yeah, the Senate will kind of say, well, big whoop-dee, But the magic really happens when everyone joins up, agrees and takes that collective action. And what I love about the SDGs too, but what needs to be reiterated is, yes, they were signed off by governments, central governments, coming together in the United Nations. But for the magic to really happen, these goals have got to be embraced, talked about, and actioned at all levels, by business, by local government, by communities, by schools, by individuals. And it's without that, we're not really going to get there. But
it's interesting. You see businesses out there and individuals inspired by certain SDGs and different businesses looking at that. We had a go at that. About 4 years ago, I think, and looked at what goals we could align with, and we didn't get there. We couldn't find anything that we could go, this is the thing we're going to be the champion for. And I'd like to re-examine that with you at some point and look at that. But at the time, we couldn't find anything specific that we could align with.
Can I make a suggestion, Harv?
Yep.
And I'll certainly look back and have this conversation about you. But I would argue that one of the goals that you embody and collective intelligence does is my favourite goal, one of the most overlooked, because it's at the end of the list and it seems a bit unsexy, and you kind of look at it and go, what the heck is that?
And your breath is running out when you're saying this.
It was, and I might have just squeaked that last one out because it was right when I was about to keel over out of my chair. But yeah, goal 17, partnerships for the goals. And it seems like the kind of leftover one where, all the others are about something specific, like climate action or gender equality, and it's very clear. And then there's this, the last two, so peace, justice and strong institutions, which are very much about, if you've got corruption, if you don't have strong, transparent and accountable government, none of these things are actually going to work. Partnerships for the goal is recognising the fundamental importance of the connectors, the people who work to promote partnerships between public and private, between individuals who are able to share and foster the connections that make the magic happen, and spark innovation and spark action, collective action. So therein, I think, lies maybe you just overlooked goal 17. I
think we absolutely did.
Because to me, that's bang on.
It's funny, I'm going, why the fuck did we miss that?
Yeah, people often overlook it because it's right at the end and it seems a bit vague.
Well, I ran out of breath at number 8, you see, so that would be, that'd be really... But, it's interesting because we are actively as a business right now looking at this, and tomorrow I've got a meeting with wonderful young woman, Mel Auld, who... And look, the last podcast before this, I'm not sure when this will go up. So I just did a podcast recently with a guy, Rob McGowan, who has set up a thing called Te Awanga, which is a movement healing the mauri of the whenua, right? We're partnering with Te Awanga because I absolutely believe what these guys are doing and go, if we can support them in bringing this. So I'm sitting here going, we missed it, mate.
I found your goal. There we go. Job done. We can end the podcast.
Over. Hey, thanks for coming, everybody. And, lovely. All right.
Before we move off the SDGs, though, I do want to do a bit of a shout-out to a fantastic social enterprise. So if you're a bit like Harv and you're there going, well, okay, 17 goals, it seems a bit much. I just want to figure out which ones are relevant to me. You can do your own research, go online. There's fantastic resources about the Sustainable Development Goals online for all ages, all industries, all levels. But there's a wonderful woman in Christchurch called Bridget Williams who left her career in law to start a social enterprise called Bead and Proceed. And she runs these fantastic creative workshops where you can just buy a kit and facilitate one yourself, or she can come and kind of facilitate a session with you, colleagues, team members, friends, family, where you actually paint yourself whether it's a necklace, a key ring, a bracelet, that reflect your top 5 sustainable development goals. I think I've mentioned this before, and I forgot my beads today. I'm feeling a bit bad about it. But yeah, my top 5 when I did it, partnerships for the goals, because to me that holds everything together. It's all about collaboration and how we get collective action. Responsible consumption and production, because I think a lot of the problems we're facing today are driven by irresponsible patterns of production and consumption that need to change and move towards a more circular model. Reduced inequalities, because I think that is absolutely key. I also have now climate action, and because of the work I do and have done in local government, sustainable cities and communities, because I also firmly believe, I think it was UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that said that the fight for our sustainable future and for battling climate change starts and ends in cities. Because of the influence of how many people live in urban environments, and that's where a lot of the change needs to happen. And why I'm so fervently promoting that, the SDGs, yes, it's United Nations, yes, it was nation states and big state diplomats that agreed to it in the end, but if we can get this applied at the city level and at community level, that's where we'll see the real magic. So that was just a bit of a shout out for Bead and Proceed. She runs fantastic workshops.
And I've seen them, and it's very cool And it's interesting when you're going through those 5, I'm going, oh yeah, that would be pretty close to what would line up for me as well. I just want to go back to the United Nations thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody who believes this will be listening to this podcast. If they are, it's a mistake. I have encountered people who believe the United Nations are trying to have got this, what do they call it, something 21, or they've got
Agenda 21.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's a classic case of, it's one of the things that really fascinates me is linguistics and the change of language over time. And Agenda 21 was kind of an earlier version of this, but very much focused as well on the local government and cities and urban centres. And it was called Agenda 21 in the sense that, if you have a meeting, you have an agenda, and like these are the important topics we need to talk about. But it's one of those words, agenda, I think over time has morphed. If you say someone's got an agenda, there's this whole subversive, someone's there with a secret agenda and they're out and it's all a conspiracy, right? So I think part of it is people hear the word agenda and it gets their backs up because they think secret agenda. None of it's been secret. It's all just part of what's been developed in the global narrative and dialogue and agreement. But also I can assure all of your listeners, I'm sure, as you said, it doesn't include anyone, that I am not here funded on behalf of the UN as one of their well-paid fat cat bureaucrats here to convince everybody of the benefits of the UN and push some kind of quote-unquote secret agenda. I'm not, there are no lizard people behind any of this.
You look reasonably normal.
Do it, yeah. So, although everyone would say that's exactly what a lizard person would say, that she's not one. But it is. You kind of just have to laugh about it.
But it's a fascinating thing when people have got this thing about the United Nations wanting to take over every country in the world, and they want them this. And I met one in person. I was like, holy fuck, you actually exist. I've seen you on social media, but bless, you actually exist.
Wow. And what did he say to you?
Yeah, not much. He buggered off. Right? But I said, do you actually believe this? And he did. And he had, all this stuff from social media and so forth. And I said, look, I've met people who work at the United Nations. I've been to United Nations events. I haven't found a skerrit of stuff I've gone, oh, that's a bit dodgy. Because I'm going, they work for us.
Yeah.
We are the United Nations.
And a lot of it is fear, and the fact that it is so far removed, the fact that it sits, it is about, nation states coming together. Your average person finds it hard to comprehend at that level. And I think it also ties into that classic movie villain, that there's always someone out there to take over the world and make the world reflect their liking and to, make everyone. And so I think it taps into people's fear, right, that the UN one day is just going to turn around and go, okay, well,
press a button and go, we've got you.
But it's in the name, right? It's a forum, and yes, it's got a bureaucracy around it. It's got people who have to, imagine if it was just, turn up and bring some fish and chips and sit on the floor with some papers. It does need a machine to kind of run it, but at the end of the day, it's without teeth unless the countries involved decide to take action. And we see that with a lot of the vetoing that goes on and a lot of the fact that the UN often can't take a lot of action on things. And I think, there are always going to be valid criticisms of the United Nations and how it can be better and how we can make it better. And absolutely, I think that's true. But just it's like democracy. It's the best thing we've got.
Yeah.
Right? What's the alternative?
Yeah.
The alternative is chaos and countries not coming together and talking together and working towards something like a global framework. Imagine if every country was off just defining sustainability as what they wanted and all 200 and odd different plans. It just makes so much more sense that we'd actually come together, particularly the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. The more people are working together, the better. And that's really just what the UN's about.
And look, sorry to degrade the conversation to that level, but it is a thing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to not ignore that because I find it doesn't bring the best out of me when I encounter this stuff. Toni, as a message for companies, so the thing is the SDGs affect nations and affects companies and it affects individuals, right? So it comes back to that. And when I went through and have looked at them and dug in behind the amount of stuff behind there, how many years did it take for the nations to come up with this, to design this thing? Do you know?
I don't know exactly how long it took, but I do know it was several years in the making. It wasn't a product of a single meeting and people just kind of scribbling stuff on the back of serviettes. There was a large consultation exercise that went into it, and that did involve business because from the outset, it's been very strongly, realised and recognised that there's going to be no way to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals or achieve sustainability in any way if it's not actively involving government, business, community, all partnerships in the world, all levels. And when we talk business as well, I think one of the challenges in the same way that the SDGs often, if we think about a lot of local government, people won't have even heard of the SDGs because it's seen as something that, of course, the Wellington diplomats have gone and signed up to this, but that's their job. It's a national level thing. In a similar way, I think often especially at the start, the SDGs, there was a lot of focus on the corporate, the big corporates, the multinationals, large companies, typically that will have a whole division devoted to sustainability, are the ones that have active roles in the achievement of the SDGs. And if you look at things, I think even in New Zealand, various others, if you look at the sustainability reports, they're all linking back their actions to the Sustainable Development Goals because they realise, particularly at that level, they need to be able to demonstrate that what they're doing is connecting back to that global framework because they are global companies, right? But therein lies the rub, in that your average business, and for the purpose of the research, so this Master of Sustainable Development Goals that I'm doing through Massey, includes on the final part. It's been dragging out, hasn't it, for a couple of years of doing
you've
this kind of
since
work.
You started it.
In a good way, I hope. The final part is a practicum where I have to work with an organisation to try and look at how these goals play out in practice. And I chose to work with our local Central Economic Development Agency, so CEDA. And there are economic development agencies all through the country, typically sponsored, funded through a mix of central and local government funding to help promote and support economic development in regions. Now, the reason I chose that, you might think that's a bit of an odd pick for, shouldn't you be off, at some sustainable company or something? Particularly the specialisation I chose for the Masters is business and sustainability. But I'm really interested, coming back to partnerships, in the role that intermediary agencies can play in supporting sustainable business transitions. And in particular, and a lot of this was, just from my own background and my own family and the fact that we've, got small businesses that we own, the struggle of small business owners and small to medium enterprises who make up, I think in New Zealand, about 97% of all businesses by number, and cumulatively, have a massive impact on our economy, jobs, and also, of course, then, by extension, impact on the environment and carbon emissions and their role in the supply chain. But unlike the big corporates who might have their sustainability division or manager, when you're an SME owner, as you well know, you wear a lot of hats. You're the owner, depending on staffing levels and changes in turnover. Sometimes you're the accountant, the behind the bar, making the coffee or pouring the drinks. You're dealing with HR issues. You've got a endless list every day of a million things that need to be done. And so I think a recent survey by Xero of companies found that, the vast majority of them, about 70%, want to do more and realise they need to do more about minimising their carbon emissions, taking more sustainable action, but they just don't know where to find the time, how to demystify the tangle of acronyms and terms and what they meant to do next, like how to actually make it real and figure out how they take those first steps. And that kind of quandary, that puzzle of we know we need to, and in many ways, small to medium enterprises, if they're empowered to do so, can become leaders. They're more nimble, they can work faster. In many ways, they can outpace change of their larger kind of corporate peers, but they're not well supported to make these transitions. And understandably, when you've got 1,000,001 things to do, somehow finding hours and hours of research time a week to go out and figure out, what tools and how do you measure this and how do I get accreditations is just too much. And so the reason I'm working at CEDA is I'm kind of thinking what could be the role in intermediary agencies, whether they're economic development agencies, local government, chambers of commerce, things like that, and helping provide that additional, the shortcuts, the support, the resources to help SMEs make these transitions. So it's been about understanding the barriers, why is it so hard, what are the motivations, and how do we overcome those to get more progress?
It sounds similar to the B Corp movement, Toni, and of course the two overlap in many ways. The first movers in New Zealand were all small to medium.
Yeah.
And then we've had the corporates starting to turn up now with Kathmandu and Sinlay and Kiwi Bank, and which is fabulous to see them trundling on board now, because it makes a huge difference to the movement, because their registration fee is annual. Membership fee is colossal because it's tied to their overhead, which has enabled us to employ a general manager for the country now. Quile is now involved in, and bingo, that just amplifies everything up. But it was a small to me. It was more small actually, and then the mediums,
not surprising.
Came on board first because it was, I don't know. Anyway, but it's really interesting to see that happen. And B Corp, it's just another thing. It's really hard to get. SDGs are really hard. They're aspirational.
Yeah. Also not the best acronym. Sounds like something you might go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Nasty rash. A nasty case of the SDGs.
I've got the SDGs there. Oh. Anyway, right, this is going to the gutter. I've never thought that. Anyway, but
basically a spaghetti junction of acronyms, buzzwords, all sorts of, and I get it, and this is what I've been hearing as I've talked to businesses, is the kind of, in many ways, it's not a lack of information, there's information aplenty out there. It's how do I make this make sense to me? How do I demystify all these random terms and acronyms? And how do I figure out my action plan? Clear as day, in a way that I can get all my staff on board. It makes sense, and I can continue to be sustainable financially as a business, as well as environmental and social. Because at the end of the day, if you're going out of business, you're not doing anyone any favours either.
Yeah, and it's just another thing. The thing I love about the Sustainable Development Goals, not using SDGs, is it's just a stunning guide of where we as humanity have got to get our shit together.
Yeah.
Because the goals there are all things we've got to work on. As a nation, so on that, as a nation, what are our stumbling blocks as a nation to move from 23, was it? How do we move up? What are the things we need to take on to move up that chain?
It was interesting, and I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head where were the bits we were going backwards on. There's a lot that needs to be done around oceans. I think one of the challenges for New Zealand is we do have such a vast footprint in terms of the ocean area that we're responsible for.
Life on land, we've gone backwards as well.
Life on land we have, and a lot of that, right, biodiversity loss. And I think, quite rightly, a lot of people are very focused on climate change and how we reduce, carbon emissions and all various, greenhouse gases to mitigate that. And absolutely, if we're all cooked, there's nothing else we can do, right? But there is such a thing called, carbon tunnel vision, where, and you hear it coming up all the time, where if you're singly focused just on your carbon emissions and, everything that you do that's, quote unquote, just sustainability in your organisation or your business is just focused around that, it means you're not considering actually the wider impacts of other sustainability challenges that we face. And, things like biodiversity and the real risk in the future of, ecosystem collapse if we don't actually get on top of this. As you well know, our ecosystems are very delicate, and some people might go, oh, you know what, it's that snail. If we need to get rid of that snail to support this development, whatever, it's one less kind of species of snail, big whoop. But sometimes all it takes is to lose a few critical species that, as humans, we don't even realise how important they are to maintaining that whole ecosystem. It can ruin us, and a lot of people talk about, all this palaver about saving the planet, save the planet. It's not about saving the planet. The planet will be fine. We've been through several extinctions, right? It's us that's going to be screwed. It's the human race. So it's, a lot of it is as much about covering and saving our own asses as the human race and waking up to that as it is about kind of an airy-fairy, save the planet thing.
And it's interesting with the carbon tunnel vision is that if we focus on that, then we would just plant the whole place in pine trees, and our carbon emissions would change dramatically, and our environment would be terrible.
Yeah,
because we lose the biodiversity, and then we'd be worse off if we just focused on that.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, one of the biggest challenge, and not just for New Zealand, but everyone is, some stuff can look like it's a silver bullet solution. Awesome, trees. Pine trees grow the fastest, pine trees everywhere. But is that the best solution? Because then when you consider the impact that has on biodiversity and around, native regeneration, all these other things that are really important to getting us back to, a sustainable balance in the way that we live here in Aotearoa, there's similar conversations happening all over the world. And even at an individual level, right? You might go, oh, cool, I'm going to buy that new cornstarch bin liner. It looks great. It's got a little green leaf on it in the supermarket. Go me. There's a lot more focus now on things like life cycle assessment. So how much carbon actually went into making that? And it might be that, the plastic bag isn't so great because, well, one, you can't get them anymore, but two, it takes a long time and in many ways it never breaks down in the environment. But if it took 3 times as much carbon to make an alternative, that's not really that great either. So there's it's a challenge at an individual level and a societal level as well. Every decision is going to have trade-offs, and it's how we figure out and make them, and how we have the fullest information available. And a big part of that comes to thinking in systems. Thinking about society as a complex and adaptive system that is always going to have to evolve and meet these challenges. And how do we just keep the right kind of balance?
What's the thing that inspires you the most in this work? What's the thing that really gets your ticker going?
A big part of it is, exactly what I said, systems thinking. So when I first came across the SDG framework, I was like, this is nice, pretty little icons, this is neat. But the more I looked at it, I was kind of perplexed, because when I looked at it, I expected to just see a bunch of environmental goals. And I was like, they've got decent work on there, and they've got quality education. And the more I looked into it, I kind of thought, holy moly, they've got everything in here. And there's a bit of head scratching for a while, and then I realised, it is because all of these things are interconnected. And as a society, I think we're particularly bad at this in government, but also I guess it's a very, again, Western-centric thing, is we tend to put stuff in silos, break stuff down into its component parts, and think we can just kind of study them in isolation. So when we think about whether it's our cities or our community or our country, we've got a bunch of economic goals that sit over here, and we go, we're going to, we want a thriving and growing economy, and we, so great, we'll set a whole lot of KPIs over there about the fact we're going to make lots of money. We also want a thriving, sustainable environment, so we're going to create some goals over here, and we're going to create an agency or fund some people or some staff to look after that bit. And then off they go, but they're doing environmental stuff. Same with social, off you go. But then these things don't connect at the end. And then you kind of sit there and you go, how come none of our businesses are taking on sustainable practices? It's because they're only being funded to grow, and nothing else. Or, in the social space, if you do an environmental project, whether it's tree planting or, green jobs, it's an environmental project. It's got great environmental outcomes, but also it's going to create jobs. So there's an economic. So for me, thinking about how we can break down some of these silos and the way that we think, I think used to be, the economy was separate to everything else. And if there was a negative impact like a pollution or, anything like that, it was called an externality, because the resources, the environment, it's all external. Economy is just this kind of magic series of invisible pipes where money just flows around, whereas trying to think about everything in a more integrated way. And then I think we went through a phase where you had, the concentric circles, the old Venn diagram, where we had this epiphany that these things overlap a little bit, and we patted ourselves on the back and went, look, there's a little bit of overlap between each. Now I think we're getting to a space, and I really am quite inspired by the work of like Kate Rayworth and Donut Economics, and a lot of it stems back to things like Danella Meadows and her systems thinking work, which is all of these things are actually nested together.
Mazzucato.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a matter of having the economy over here and just having people that are good at that, and then people in the environment over here, but recognising that we need to have, our aim should really be to have a thriving economy and society that lives within the means of the planet, and meets the needs of everyone who's here. And our challenge is to strike that balance and to always consider those constraints, and think not of separate circles or slightly overlapping Venn diagram circles, but as concentric circles that sit together. Because ultimately the economy doesn't operate distinctly and separately from society, and distinctly and separately from the environment. They are inseparable. And trying to get to a system in a way that we make decisions that recognises that interdependence, and recognises the fact that this is a complex system and one change over here can impact another, that really gets me going and gets me excited. And that's what got me really interested in the SDGs, because you look at them and you look at something like climate action, and then you look at Goal 4 quality education, and you realise there's an interdependence. You're not going to get good climate action unless people are educated. about it, about the risks, about what they can do. Likewise, no poverty. There's a reason why they're not ranked. I think that's often a question I get, are the SDGs ranked in order of importance? Obviously no, because my favourite is 17, and I think, if there was any for myself, that's the first one. But they did say one exception is there's a reason why no poverty is number one. Because if you are living hand to mouth and spending every waking day thinking about am I going to feed my family, how am I going to feed my kids, the capacity for you to think about anything broader, about environmental impact, about anything like that is out the window because you're in survival mode. So this is why I love the SDGs. They're integrated, they're interconnected. They show that, what we need to do to navigate the future is a series of really complex trade-offs and decisions and compromises around social, environmental and economic. And they can't be made in isolation.
And just thinking about the correlation between educating women and how many babies they have, direct correlation between those, and that for how many generations or centuries that educating women was not seen as important, and that correlation is a fascinating thing. Educate women and they have children later and they have less of them, It's just subtle things like that, and then the ramifications of that on poverty and all those things, it's huge.
And it's those interdependencies that really get me fascinated and interested and really speak to that complex adaptive system that we live in. And this is why Goal 12 is one that I'm quite drawn to, responsible consumption and production. Because if you think often to people, again, to the point of something like climate change, people will talk about it, it's an environmental issue. It's not an environmental problem, right, or issue. It is an economic issue that is having an impact on the environment. Yep. So at the end of the day, what's driving it is we've got patterns of consumption, production, economy that are exceeding the capacity of the planet, the life-giving capacity and the biosphere and what we need to do. So in order to change that, it's not just a matter of chucking money at the quote-unquote environment. It's going back to address what is it we need to change about the way that we do things and the way that we operate our economy that's going to mean that it's not going to have this impact that it's currently having. And that's where things like circular economy, get me quite excited too.
Look, and I was just going to say, it's interesting, Toni, that so many of the leading economists of our age are female. Mm. I'm not sure historically, I think that's a new thing. I don't know that, but I have a hunch, that Raworth and Mazzucato and, there's a heap of others are leading the way in this new era. Absolutely,
and they dare to challenge the status quo, and I think that's part of it as well.
I heard a podcast the other day, there was an overlay from a woman. I got frustrated with it because it didn't expand on it, but then was overlaying Indigenous practices, overlaying the donut economy of Rawis. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting.
I have seen it. And one of the interesting things they've done is they've flipped so that the whenua, the environment, is the foundational part of the donut to, acknowledge that relationship to the land and to the whenua. So that's really interesting and raises a point that I wanted to make too, Harv, that there is a valid criticism against the SDGs, and there are several. As with all things, everything should be open to critique and examination, and that's what I've really enjoyed about the Masters at Massey, is that it's been done with a really strong critique, and one of the lenses through which they critique it is, Indigenous views and perspectives, and that has been a really strong thing coming through, is that, none of the SDGs actually speak directly to the importance of Indigenous views and a more sustainable future for the world. And so that has been, I think, articulated and recognised quite strongly by a lot of people about, it's not a matter of, in many ways, coming up with a new way of living. Indigenous populations and communities have found ways to live in harmony with nature for a long time. So there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of wisdom that can be drawn upon, and when we come back to things like circular economy, that's effectively what it's trying to bring us back to, mimicking in many ways a closer association with our natural environment. And a lot of Indigenous communities are like, well, yes, this is what we've been saying for some time. I'm glad you've finally come to the party.
Or coming to the party.
Coming to the party.
Yeah.
And we're still a while off, right? But, even, circular economy, I think I often reflect on the fact that, when I'm older, I've got grandkids, how the grandparents always have some wacky story. And they're like, when I was a kid, I walked 20 miles in the snow to school. Or there's something that they did. People go, I can't believe, you used to do this. Or I can't believe in your day it was acceptable to do that. I often reflect when I've got kids, they'll be like, so you just took plastic stuff that you knew was not going to break down anywhere and you just threw it in a bin, and then they collected it and just made these mountains of rubbish and then buried them in the ground. And we were like, yes, even though you knew it wasn't going anywhere. Like, they're going to look at us and be like, what the hell were you thinking? And we won't have anything to say, because when you step back and look at it, it is absolutely freaking ridiculous. Because the linear economy is, we take stuff, we make stuff, we use it, and then we chuck it away. And we inherently, you sit down and take anyone through the logic of it, nobody can deny that it's absolutely ridiculous and it's unsustainable. We just can't keep doing it. So we need to move to a system which is circular by design from the outset, tries to reuse stuff as much as possible, and ideally all we have that's waste is stuff that can rot or can compost or can go back into the ecosystem or actually truly biodegrade and not take like 500 years. Because I'm sitting here thinking, like, every single toothbrush I've had in my life is still out there somewhere.
Yep, sitting in landfill.
Mind blown, everyone, when you think about it.
Toni Grace was here.
My little, dinosaur toothbrush when I was 6. It's out there somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Toni, sort of on track. I went to see Avatar the other day. Went back to see the original Avatar movie in preparation for the next one. And I really enjoyed it the first time I saw it. And it's a wicked film. Went back and saw it the other day and was just like, oh my God, this is confronting. And have you seen the movie?
I have, yeah.
It was just such a, and James Cameron is a practicing druid, apparently. He's practices pagan, whatever. And when you look at the film, it's about the human race going to another planet because they've burned up all the resources on Earth and they found another planet, so they've gone off there and they found a rare metal there that's worth X amount, and they're mining the fuck out of this new planet, and the indigenous race is trying to fight back on them, and just going, oh, this is...
I had a similar moment the other day when I was watching WALL-E again with my kids. There's a lot of great, and our storytellers, our artists, our filmmakers have been telling these stories for some time. Our scientists have been talking about climate change for decades, but as a human race, we're a bit daft. And I think our story of the economy and how it operates and how it's meant to be and how it has to be has just been so, stickable and hard to shake, but it feels like we're getting to a bit of a tipping point. And I've definitely noticed this in just kind of talking with the work I'm doing with my masters and with CEDA. It's kind of moving to a space where, you used to be, if you're a business and you had a sustainability plan or policy and initiatives in place, you're a bit weird and progressive and, typically like you're a social enterprise and you're like, well, of course you would, But we're kind of getting to a space now where if you're any business and you don't have it somewhere in your business, you're now the outlier. It's now becoming an expectation. But for me, the real question is how fast can we make that transition? And a big part of my research is looking at, for small to medium enterprises, we need to provide more support as communities. And there's an opportunity there. Like I said, once enabled and empowered, SMEs can do amazing things with these transitions, but also they're the heart of a local economy. And, I've recently returned to local government in my work, but looking at more kind of long-term planning and strategy, and that's where the future is. And I come back to Ban Ki-moon's statement about, the fight for, the future of our planet is going to live and die in cities, because when you talk to SMEs, they're not influenced by the SDGs. You just wave it around in front of them and they go, oh yeah, of course, yeah, I should be doing that. There's even some research to show that compliance, if a government comes in and says, oh yeah, we'll slap you on the wrist, we'll fine you, a lot of businesses are resistant to that because they're being forced to do it, and it's not exactly tapping into the motivations. The closer the stakeholder and the influencer is to the business, the more likely you're going to get that change. It's the customers, it's the staff, it's the business next door or in the industry that you see doing something. This is where the influence is going to happen. So to me, it's about how do we create these local ecosystems connected between government, community, business that tell the stories, create the new norms, provide the tools and resources, provide a supportive environment for people to make this transition, and just try to make it easier for everyone, because this very much comes back to what I learned out of the Innovate process with UHAV. Was, you recall, ours was a failure, which is great because to quote you back to UHAV, failure is the compost of innovation. I do love that line. But what we learned from it was it's that intention-action dilemma. It's not enough that people want to do something about climate change to be more sustainable. It's that we help people overcome that intention-action gap and can actually turn that intention into work. Take that, yes, I really should, into I am doing and I'm making the change. And, my advice to people would be like, start small. Do what you got to do. Set yourself some goals. We don't need a handful of people doing this perfectly. We need everybody doing it imperfectly. And if you kind of go, well, I'll never be this perfect zero waste sustainable business or this perfect whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't need to flip a switch and become this amazing sustainability success story overnight. Just plan it in a way that makes sense for your business or for you or for your family. Commit to continual improvement. So yeah, if you just do one thing and pat yourself on the back and go, there we go, I've done my green tick, that is greenwashing. But what overcomes greenwashing is a commitment to collective improvement. And to go, this year I'm doing this, and next year, I can't afford this next year, but this year, but I'm going to put it in next year's business plan, and I'm going to commit to that. Or the focus this year is going to be on our waste, and next year it's going to be on our energy and lighting. Keep it reasonable, keep it actionable. Most of all, keep it fun, because if it becomes a big compliance thing, people turn off. If people feel like they're being talked at or judged or lauded over with stats and reporting, and you've got to make it tap into people's intrinsic values and motivations, and therein I think lies one of the big opportunities for a lot of businesses now, is that particularly younger workforce, they're looking for that purpose through their work. They want to know that they're working for a company or a business or an organisation that is having a positive impact on the community and the environment around them. And those that don't give a shit are soon going to find out that a lot of people don't want to work for them anymore. And so there's a lot of incentives there, intrinsic, extrinsic, but we do need to help as much as we can through partnerships between government, private sector, to provide kind of the tools, the empowerment, the stories, in order to inspire that collective action. And ideally at a local level too, because that's where it's really going to impact.
Going back to the B Corp thing, for me, as a lazy bastard, is that B Corp helps me commit and do something. Because I'm a bugger at sort of meandering about. And I also love the fact that every time we recertify, the standards have increased. So you can't turn up again and do what you did last time, because you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've upped the ante. And all the things are interrelated. And thinking about the younger generation, my generation were impressed by people who made lots of money and all that sort of stuff. We couldn't have given a fuck about the environment, right? Seriously. It was more, yes, we would talk about it and think about it a bit, but that was...
How cool does the job title sound?
Yes.
How much money is it going to get me? And,
yeah, right. And, I love John Clark's wonderful comedies and videos, and he talked about, the environment. The environment's out there, it's out at sea. It's, the oil spill's out there. It doesn't affect us. Where now I see the really smart young people being motivated by companies that are doing wicked things, right? So you talked about before the social enterprise down in Christchurch with the beads, right? It inspires you more than somebody who's making a whole lot of money, but the environment's not great.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I've got a bit of a soft spot for SMEs as well as typically. And a lot of people will just think, they're just business, they're to make a living and earn some money and, pay some people and reap some profits. But particularly when you're talking about a local setting, most business owners, they're there to make a living, but they're usually driven by something bigger. If it's, I've got a bar or a restaurant, I want to create a place where people come together and enjoy each other's company and have fun. Or if they're providing a type of service, or clothing stores, I want people to feel good about themselves. I want people to get out and and share their identity. There's usually something driving. So one of the benefits I would say to people listening, that if you're curious about the SDGs, look them up. If you want to have some kind of hui or session with your business, one of the benefits you'll find is, yes, it helps you maybe map out a sustainability action plan for your business, what you might do in the community or what you might be doing in-house. But a real benefit of these sessions is that it actually connects people on their values. You get to express to your employees and your staff and your peers, what your common purpose is, why you exist, what drives you, and then you actually get to connect with other people on that, and then you make plans and actions together to make a difference and to improve that social or environmental impact. And so it can be a lot of wins from doing a session like this. And the SDGs in particular, and when I talk to young people, often a lot of them are stressed and perplexed by the scale of the issues we have ahead of us, and between all the various 17 SDGs, there's a lot. Oh my God, am I going to spend my time trying to make a difference around waste or climate action or gender equality or the oceans? You're divided. So this ability to take something like the SDGs and kind of go chill, like you personally don't have to achieve all 17, but if you can help hone in on those areas where you've got passion, you've got the networks and experience where you feel like you can make a difference, it's in your line of work, you can do something about it. Do it and have faith that everyone else around you is doing their own and probably looking at other goals, and together this kind of patchwork of progress is going to get us where we need to go. And it's that collective collective commitment and action. There's a great Kate Shepherd quote. It was around voting, but I'm sure if she was still around it would apply to climate action and sustainability action is, do not ever think your vote doesn't count. Even the rain that wets the parched ground is made up of 1,000 individual drops. So this whole notion that you could be like, well, what does it matter? I hear this all the time. Why should New Zealand bother? It's not going to matter. Why should I do something? It's not going to make a difference. The only way we've ever in the history of humanity made meaningful change is a whole lot of people coming together with small individual actions that have grown over time to become collective change and transition. And so it's the same with the challenge we're facing. And while I'm on it, this is probably coming out too late, but the importance of vote in the local elections, if you haven't already.
For 2026.
Yeah,
right?
I might be a bit late for this round,
Yep.
but it's that exact same thing. Don't just despair and throw your hands in the air, but focus on what you can do. And your values and the issues you're passionate about will change over time, but as long as you're doing something, it can be really, really powerful.
You'll have a view on this, but one of my frustrations with Kiwis from time to time, they go, we're small, what we do doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
I'd say the world looks to New Zealand for a lot more than people think, and this is part of why having this interesting coming together of an international relations and a sustainability kind of career is that having been out there, I can see New Zealand is small, but we're mighty. And we can, in a lot of these forums and things I was involved in, which had like the United States and the UK and Canada and Australia, we were very much a small fish in a big pond with a whole lot of other big fish. But often we could do things that none of them could do. We could pilot stuff. We could get stuff up and running. Often we were the mediator. With one of the things I did, we ended up setting up and establishing and running the permanent multilateral secretariat for that group of 5 countries, because we were the only ones that could get our shit together to do it, and because everyone trusted us. People saw us as a bit of a neutral party. So being small is an advantage, because you can be a mediator. People don't see you as a threat, and therefore they're more willing to listen. And so, one, I would just say, look, even just talking geopolitics, we have a really strong ability there. Second, I kind of go at an individual level, come back to the SDGs and the fact that, a classic one I get a lot is, why bother? There's countries like China and India, and look, their middle classes are growing, and inevitably they're all going to consume a whole lot more, and we could do a lot today, but it's not going to matter in 10, 15 years' time, because it's all going to get blown right out of proportion. What I'd say to that is, okay, so this is assuming that a lot of these countries, as people move up, and they're into the middle classes or above, and they have more disposable income, and they do things that naturally they're going to start progressing and acting like what we are, going out to Kmart, whatever, and buying lots of shit that we don't need. So the only way to mitigate that problem is for us as the developed world, as countries like New Zealand, to eat a little bit of humble pie and demonstrate to the rest of the world that it is possible to have a country with a high standard of living, to have high incomes, to be a country that has developed and it meets the needs of everyone, and still not shit all over the planet. So we need to show that that's possible, because if we don't, as individuals, as a country, as a community, show the rest of the world that, yep, okay, we screwed up a bit the first time. We recognised the way that we did that was unsustainable. We're now finding a new way of introducing circular economies and not having these externalities and managing our emissions. That's the only hope, because then a lot of these other countries would be able to look and go, okay, actually it is possible for us to evolve our economies in a way that more people get more, a higher standard of living, and we can meet the needs of everyone, and we can get people out of poverty. And that doesn't mean setting up a system which is inevitably going to crap all over the planet and ruin the only home we have. So it's all up to us. It's down to us as individuals, communities, and as a country. There is a lot we can do, and a lot more people are looking to New Zealand than I think people realise.
That's a great way to round off this conversation, Toni. And I really think you sound hopeful.
Yes. I mean, if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here talking to you, Harv. I'd be sitting in the backyard with a beer and kicking back waiting for the end of days, right? But the only way is to actually take action. And we know it's possible. And yeah, it's been a shit couple of years with COVID, right? But what is one of the things that COVID actually has shown us? When it comes to the pinch, we can turn shit around. Like, who would have thought it was possible to literally lock everyone in the world at home for months on end? It is impossible. You can't restrict people's freedoms like that. You can't expect people to...
Billions of people.
And it was done. Money invested and spent, like, mind-boggling amounts like never before. It proved that it can be done. And so it's just a matter of will. And the problem with climate change is it's a slower moving beast. But the evidence is literally washing up and lapping up at our doors now. And so I think it's more and more people, the pressure's going to come on in the same way that it did with COVID. Not as fast, but we know that we're capable of it, of turning the train or the bus around, so to speak.
What else do we need to cover off, Toni?
I think that's about it, Harv. I think, if people would just take away that, if you're thinking about doing something, do it. Connect with people around you, because it's the power of collective action that's going to get us there. And do look up the SDGs, because they're a great framework for pulling all this stuff together, and for helping you make those mental connections between how what you do or what you could do connects to social, environmental and economic outcomes. And it gives you hope, because you look around the world and you realise it's not just New Zealand doing this, it's countries all over the world.
Yep.
And the song sheet's there, we're just going to sing from it.
Nice. Toni, thank you for your time and for that overview, and for number 17.
Yep.
And
You're
I'm just
welcome.
going, oof, how did we miss that? It's fascinating. You know, it really is. I'm going, and maybe it was too soon for us. Maybe we hadn't worked that out. But at the time for us, it was just about, we were trying to force ourselves to find something to align with. And as soon as, because you go number 17, I'm going, well, partnerships, I'm going, yeah, because we are actively now being really overt with this, and starting with this, and then we've got this lined up, and going, we want to partner with you because we have the same values and we want to help you and whatever. So I'm just sitting there going, I feel that feels really exciting to me.
Perfect, Harv. Love your work.
Thanks, Toni. Good luck with the finishing the Masters.
Thank you. Almost there.
Next one is a PhD.
Yeah, don't say that. Don't let my husband do that.
Toni, thanks for doing your work, and good luck with the future.
Thanks, Harv. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.